Okay, my name's Danny, and I'm not sure you're going to believe me, so I'm just going to start with my uncle's storage unit and go from there. I walked in thinking it was the last boring chore on a list that I've been working on through for 3 months. I had already handled everything else after he passed: the house, the accounts, even dragging his 2009 Corolla to the scrapyard because nobody wanted a car with 160,000 miles and a passenger door that didn't lock. I did all the responsible nephew things you're supposed to do when your uncle dies, and you're the only family left who'll pick up the phone. I do project coordination for a construction company, so I'm good at checklists, and Robert's estate was just one more checklist. Which is ironic because I stopped picking up Robert's phone calls about 2 years before he died. But the storage unit was still out there, billing $89 a month to an estate account that was running out of patience. 15 years of that. So probably something stupid like 15-20 grand to store whatever a retired city worker with no wife and no hobbies decides to hoard when he's got nothing else going on. I needed it gone. So there I was, Saturday afternoon in late October, driving up Route 8 toward a place called Secure Space Storage, with a box of trash bags in my back seat and a box cutter in my jacket pocket. Pittsburgh gray overhead, cold as hell. I figured an hour, maybe less, in and out. And look, I know how it sounds when I say I stopped taking his calls, but you have to understand what those calls were. Robert would leave these voicemails, and I don't mean, "Hey, how are you? Let's grab dinner." He would call and say things like, "Danny, don't walk through the park after dark this week." No context, nothing. Just that, and then he would hang up. Or he would call and ask if I had noticed anything about my neighbor's dog. Not my dog. I don't have a dog. But somehow, Robert knew the lady next door had one, and he wanted to know if it was acting strange. And when I asked him why, he said he couldn't get into it on the phone. Every conversation was like that, just pieces of something that only made sense to him. And he would say it with all this urgency that made you feel like you were the crazy one for not following along. I played one of those voicemails for my buddy Jake once, and Jake laughed so hard he almost choked on his beer. After that, it became a thing. Robert would call, I would let it go to voicemail, and if it was weird enough, I would play it for people. The family word for Robert was eccentric, which is what you say about somebody when you don't want to say the real thing. I said the real thing. I wouldn't say it to his face, but I said it to anyone who would listen. My uncle was crazy. Sad, harmless, but crazy. That's what I thought anyway, what I told people. And I need you to understand that part, how sure I was, because it matters later. So that's where my head was when I pulled into Secure Space Storage. The office was closed, but there was a directory on the wall by the entrance. And I found Robert's unit number on the lease paperwork, 217, second floor. The whole place smelled like old cardboard and someone's couch. I found the hallway, walked down to 217 at the end, and the padlock gave me a fight for a minute before the key finally turned. I rolled up the door. I expected junk, the usual hoarder disaster, but when I looked inside, it was shelving along the side walls. Industrial metal, bolted together, with filing boxes labeled on the spines and composition notebooks lined up in a neat row. The front half of the unit was stacked with regular boxes and bags, but behind all that, I could see the shelving went deeper. Everything was organized, which didn't stop me because organized crazy is still crazy. And I had trash bags, and I wanted to go home. I stepped inside. The first few boxes were easy. Robert had put the normal stuff near the front. Old clothes, kitchen things. The kind of junk you end up with when you live alone for 20 years and never throw anything away. I barely looked at any of it, just opened the trash bag and started tossing. I was making good time. And then I found his tackle box, old green metal, scratched to hell, and when I popped it open, the smell hit me before I could think about it. Bait and rust. Like being 10 years old again, sitting in Robert's boat at Moraine State Park. He used to take me fishing up there, and I complained the entire drive every single time. But once we got on the water, I just went quiet, and Robert never tried to fill the silence. Nobody else in my family could do that. I put the tackle box aside. I kept it, but I didn't make a thing of it. That's not what I do. Behind the normal stuff though, that's where it got weird. Because the organized shelving I had seen when I first rolled up the door, that wasn't the half of it. Robert had turned the back 2/3 of this unit into a workspace. Filing boxes labeled in his handwriting going back 15, maybe 20 years, composition notebooks numbered on the spine. And then I looked at the back wall and said, okay. There was a foam board covered in pushpins, colored ones, with little handwritten labels I couldn't read from where I was standing, and it looked like something out of a cop show. He had a folding chair set up in the middle of it all, with a clip-on lamp clamped to one of the shelves, and next to the chair was a cardboard box he had been using as a table, coffee ring still on top of it. He could have just been there. It was an office, that's what I was looking at. Robert had been coming here regularly for years, to sit in this little setup and work on whatever this was. $89 a month for a place where nobody could see what he was doing or tell him he was losing his mind. I should have just started filling trash bags and stuck with the plan, but the labels on those boxes were too neat and careful, and the whole thing just, I don't know, it didn't match. The crazy uncle I had in my head would not have built this. Whatever Robert believed, he had been working it like a job. I pulled the first box off the shelf. I just needed to know what I was dealing with before I could throw it away. At least that's what I told myself. But the trash bag was on the floor behind me, and I had already forgotten about it. Clippings. That's what was inside. Newspaper clippings of missing persons cases, all Pittsburgh area, with handwritten notes in the margins connecting one article to another. And for about 30 seconds, I felt like I called it. This was textbook. Lonely guy with too much time on his hands, cutting sad stories out of the Post-Gazette and taping them to folders. I actually reached for the trash bag. But then I stopped, because the notes weren't ranting, they were organized. Each clipping had a color-coded tab linking it to another folder, and the margin notes were dates and location codes that matched labels on other boxes. And I'm looking at this thinking, wait. Robert had put together an actual index, a filing system, the kind you would create if you were tracking something real and needed to find any piece of information fast. And I know what that looks like because I built tracking systems at work, and when I looked at Robert's margin codes, I understood them immediately because they followed the same logic mine do. He had organized this exactly the way I would have. That's the part that got me. The clippings I could dismiss, but the method behind them was something else. A crazy person does not build a clean index. So I looked at the foam board map stuck on the back wall. Really looked at it this time. The pushpins were grouped in clusters, and each cluster had a handwritten label with a year range, like 1987 to 1988, and 1996 to 1997, and so on. I traced them across the board, and they weren't random. They moved. Whatever Robert was tracking shifted positions across the city every time, one neighborhood to the next, and the gaps between the clusters were roughly the same, somewhere around 8 to 10 years apart. Something had been happening in Pittsburgh in a pattern, and Robert had mapped it. I sat down in the folding chair. I did not plan to do that, and I picked up the first composition notebook and opened it, and Robert's handwriting was smaller than I expected, steady and careful. The kind you'd use if you knew you were going to need to read this again later. The entries were field notes, dates and locations, and what he saw, written in this dry, precise voice, with none of the conspiracy stuff you would expect. Just a guy writing down what he noticed, page after page, like it was his job, even though nobody was paying him to do it. I read for a long time. At some point, my phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from Jake asking if I wanted to grab food later, and I realized I'd been sitting in that chair for over an hour. I still did not believe any of it. I want to be clear about that. But an hour ago, the word crazy fit Robert perfectly. And now, I was sitting in his chair, reading his notes, and I could not make it stick. One of the notebooks had references to photos, little codes in the margin, C4C, or Ref Photo 12A background, with page numbers linking back to other entries. So I went looking, and in one of those lower boxes, I found them. Printed photographs, some old Polaroids, some that looked like they came off a home printer, and there were dozens of them. Each one labeled on the back in Robert's handwriting with a date and a location and one of these reference codes. The man had cross-referenced his photographs. The photos themselves were nothing, just streets and intersections and parking lots. A bus stop on what might have been Murray Avenue, they looked like surveillance shots taken by someone who did not know how to frame a picture. And if I had found them without the notebooks, I would have tossed the whole box without a second thought. But the notebooks told me where to look. One entry said photo 4C, background, left of bus stop. So I started digging through the box, looking for 4C. Robert had them in rough order, but not perfect, so it took me a minute. When I found it, I flipped it over and checked the background to the left of the bus stop, and there was a figure standing on the sidewalk. Tall, gray suit, something in his left hand. I would have missed it completely if Robert had not circled it in ballpoint pen in the back, with a note pointing right to it. It was just a person standing there, or it looked like one. So I found the next reference, a photo from a completely different year, and there it was again, the figure in the gray suit with that same posture, like it had been copied and pasted into someone else's photograph. And then the next one was from maybe 10 years earlier based on the cars in the background, and it was still there. Same tall shape in a gray suit standing on a sidewalk somewhere in Pittsburgh with that thing in his left hand. An umbrella, I realized. Closed, always in the left hand, in every photo. After that, I stopped following the notebook and just started going through the photos on my own. And the more I looked, the more I found it. In the background of what looked like a block party, and then again at the edge of a parking lot at night, and then standing across the street from a corner store in what had to be the 80s based on the signage. All of them, just standing there. Decades of photos, and the figure had not changed at all. I tried to get a better look at the face. Robert had a few shots that were closer, clearer, and the face was... I don't really know how to describe this. It had features, it was human shaped, but it looked like someone had assembled it from a description instead of actually seeing a face. And the pieces did not quite sit right. The eyes were too far apart, and the mouth was too low. And the longer I looked at it, the more my brain just wanted to stop. Something in me kept trying to look away. I put the photo down and picked up another one, and it was the same. I could not look at the face for more than a few seconds without wanting to turn it over. By the time I looked up, the photos were all over the floor around me. I had spread them out without realizing it. Dozens of them covering the concrete around the folding chair, and the same figure was in every single one of them. My hands were shaking. I looked down and saw them doing it, and I thought, okay, that's happening now. I kept going. I don't know why. I think by that point, I had stopped making decisions about what to do and was just pulling things off shelves because I could not stop. And that's when I found the box with her name on it. Helen. It was a filing box like the others, but it looked different. The cardboard was softer, more handled. Robert must have opened and closed this one hundreds of times, and he had written her name on the label by hand, and you could tell he took his time with it. Bigger letters, steadier than the other labels. I knew the name. I had heard it maybe twice growing up. The way you hear a name in a family conversation that everybody else already understands and nobody explains to the kid. An aunt who was not around. That was all I had. Inside was a missing persons report, and clipped to the front of it was a photograph of a woman. Smiling, brown hair, normal face. Just a personal photo that someone had kept because she looked happy in it. Robert had kept this one separate from everything else, right at the front of the folder where it would be the first thing he saw every time he opened the box. Below that was their wedding photo, and I was not ready for it. It was small, nothing fancy, but both of them were smiling in it, and Robert looked like a completely different person. Younger, obviously, but that was not what got me. He just looked lighter, like someone who had not yet become the man I knew. Just a guy standing next to a woman he loved on what was probably the best day of his life. I had to put it down for a second. The rest of Helen's file was the most thorough thing in the entire archive, and I read through all of it. At some point, my back started aching from the folding chair, and I realized the light in the hallway outside had changed, so it must have been a while. Robert had built a timeline of her last weeks, everything from where she went to who she talked to, and I conducted witness interviews himself, walking door to door, writing them out by hand. But the handwriting in this section was different from the notebooks. The notebooks were steady and controlled, and Helen's file was not. You could see it in the letters. the way they got tighter and shakier the further he got into the timeline. This was a husband looking for his wife, and the precision was just him trying to hold himself together while he did it. Helen had disappeared about 20 years ago. She was one of the several people who vanished in the same part of the city within the same few weeks, and something about the dates nagged at me. So I got up and walked over to the foam board map on the wall. I found the cluster that matched the year range and the location, and it was right there. Helen had disappeared during one of the cycles Robert was tracking. And tucked into the back of the folder, behind everything else, was just one more photo. A street in Helen's neighborhood. Robert had written the date on the back. It was from the year she vanished. And in the background, on the sidewalk near what his notes said was Helen's daily walking routine, there was the figure. Gray suit, umbrella in his left hand, standing there the way it always stood. Robert had found this photo after Helen was already gone. Based on his notes, that was the first time he ever saw the figure, and that was how this whole thing started. His wife disappeared and nobody could explain it, and Robert started looking. He was looking for Helen, that's all. And what he found instead was a pattern, and the pattern would not let him go. And it ate the next 20 years of his life and turned him into the guy his own family called crazy behind his back. I put Helen's photo back in the folder, carefully, and then I closed the box. I was not clearing out a crazy man's storage unit anymore. I don't know what I was doing, but it was not that. By then, I had been in the storage unit for hours. I was cold and my back hurt, and I had not eaten anything since a gas station coffee that morning. And none of that mattered because I was already reaching for the next box on the shelf. The box at the top of the stack was different from the rest. Newer cardboard, recent label, and when I pulled it down, it was lighter than the others because there was less in it. Robert's last project, I figured, whatever he was working on before he died. I opened it up on my lap, and the first thing I saw was a printed map, the kind of stuff you get off Google Maps, and I knew the streets on it before I even read the labels because I drive them every day. It was my neighborhood, my block, and Robert had put a small pencil mark next to my building, just a neat little dot the same way he marked everything else in the archive. I stared at it for a while. My brain was doing that thing where it tries to come up with an explanation that isn't the obvious one, and it was not finding anything. The rest of the box was Robert's notes from his last few weeks. Same format as the other notebooks. Dates, times, locations. But these were on loose paper instead of in a composition book, like he had been writing fast and not gotten around to organizing them yet. And they were all about my area. He had been there, on the streets I walk every day, watching, and he wrote down when the figure appeared, and where it stood, and how close it was getting to my building. He had logged it the same way he logged every other cycle, patient, methodical, just writing down what he saw. Except this time, the pin on the map was my front door. I went back to the foam board on the wall, the most recent cluster of pins, the one furthest to the right. I had glanced at it earlier, but had not been able to read the label from across the room. I could read it now. It was my neighborhood. The current cycle, the one that was active when Robert died, was centered right on top of me. And then I started matching the dates. Robert's notes had specific entries, a date, a time, a location where he spotted the figure, and I could match them to his phone calls because I remembered when the voicemails came in, roughly. The one about the park, Robert had an entry from that same week. The figure spotted near the park entrance on Braddock, evening, standing under a tree. He saw it there, and he called me that night and told me not to walk through the park after dark, and I let it go to voicemail and played it for Jake, and we laughed about it. And then the dog thing. Robert had a note from a few days before that call. He had been parked on my street, watching, and he wrote that a dog on the second floor was barking at the sidewalk below the window, non-stop, aggressive. And when Robert looked, there was nothing visible on the sidewalk, or nothing he could see. He called me the next morning to ask about the dog. I remember thinking it was one of the weirder ones, and I told the story at a cookout that weekend. I did not go through every entry. 2 was enough. I could feel what the rest of the file was going to tell me, so I flipped to the back of the stack instead because I already knew what I was going to find there. A photograph. My street, taken from what looked like a parked car across the road. My building entrance on the left side of the frame. And on the sidewalk, maybe 30 feet from my front door, the figure. Clear on film, the way it always was. Suit, umbrella, that stillness that did not look like a person standing on a sidewalk, but like a piece of furniture someone left on the curb. I set the photo on my knee and stayed with it. Outside the storage unit, the hallway lights were buzzing, and I was sitting in Robert's folding chair holding a picture of something impossible standing in front of my home. And all I could think about was the voicemails. All the ones I ignored, and the ones I played for a laugh. Robert could not explain any of this over the phone. Who would believe him? I mean, I was his family, and I did not believe him when he was standing right in front of me. So he stripped it down to the simplest thing he could say. Don't go to the park. Check on the dog. Stay inside this week. And I heard those messages, and I decided he was crazy, and I stopped calling him back. And he kept calling anyway. I stopped answering and made him into a joke, and he still kept calling. He just kept leaving voicemails because that was the only thing he could still do for me, and I could not even be bothered to listen to them. I put the photo back in the box and closed it, and I did not know what to do with my hands after that, so I just sat there. I went to put the box back on the shelf, and it wobbled. Something heavy shifting at the bottom that I had not noticed when I was going through the papers. So I set it down and pulled out the files I had already looked at, and underneath everything, wrapped in a plastic grocery bag, there was a camcorder. Small, black, one of those Panasonic handhelds from maybe 10 years ago, with the flip-out screen on the side. The lens cap was on, and the battery was dead, but there was a USB cable rubber banded to the strap, and Robert's clip-on lamp was plugged into a power strip behind the shelving unit. So I plugged the camera in and waited. The red charging light came on. I watched it blink for what felt like 10 minutes, but was probably 3. And at some point my eyes drifted down to the concrete floor around the chair, and there were scuff marks, dozens of them. Arcs from where Robert must have shifted his feet over years of sitting in this exact spot. And the thought of that almost broke me worse than the photos did. I looked at the ceiling instead. When the light went solid, I turned the camera on and the screen lit up blue, and then went to the menu. One video file on the memory card. I pressed play. The footage was dark and shaky, and for the first few seconds, I could not tell what I was looking at. Night. Streetlights casting that orange-yellow glow that makes everything look flat. And audio. Someone breathing hard, way too hard. The kind of breathing you hear from a guy who should not be running, but is. Robert was walking, fast. I could not see him because he was holding the camera, but I could hear him, and the image bounced with every step. Then the camera steadied for a second, and I saw the street, and I knew exactly where he was because I had walked that block 1,000 times. He was maybe 200 feet from my building. The camera pointed down the sidewalk, and I could see it, the figure. And in the photos, it had always been still, frozen, a shape in the background you had to squint at. But on the video, it was right there in the middle of the frame, and it was a completely different thing. It was standing on the sidewalk under a street light, and everything around it was doing what things do at night. Leaves moving, light shifting, shadows from passing cars, and the figure was not doing any of that. It was just there. Still. The way nothing alive is still. The suit, the umbrella in its left hand. And the face, which I had thought was bad in photographs, was worse on video because the camera was clear enough that I could see the details, and my brain still could not put them together. It was like looking at a picture that had been printed wrong, where everything is technically there, but none of it lines up. Robert's breathing got worse. He was walking toward it. I watched the image get closer and the figure get larger on the screen, and I understood what I was watching, and I wanted to turn it off, but I didn't. He was maybe 50 feet away from it now, and the camera was shaking badly because his hands were shaking, and I could hear him trying to say something, but his breath kept catching, and then he said it. "Don't you dare," his voice. I knew it immediately. The one from every voicemail. The voice that told me not to walk through the park, except now it was shaking so badly that the words barely held together. "Don't you dare touch my family." He said it again, quieter, like he was losing the air for it. "Don't you dare touch my family." And I heard him take another step, and another. And on the screen, the figure was close enough now that it filled most of the frame. And something happened that I had not seen in any of the photographs. It moved. Not much. The head tilted, maybe, or something in the shoulders shifted, but its posture changed. For the first time in all of Robert's documentation, the photos, the notes, everything, the thing on the sidewalk seemed to know someone was there. Robert made a sound, this low, involuntary thing, like the air went out of him all at once. And then the breathing changed. It went from ragged to wrong. This wet, hitching rhythm that was not exertion anymore. And the camera started to drop. The image tilted sideways, and I saw the sidewalk rushing up, and then the camera hit the ground, and the picture went to concrete and a smear of orange streetlight, and I could hear him. I could hear Robert on the ground, trying to breathe. And what that sounded like is something I am not going to get into. I sat there and listened to my uncle die on a sidewalk 50 feet from my front door. And the last thing on the audio before the camera cut was him trying to say something that might have been my name. The screen went black, the battery icon blinked once, and the camera died. I sat there in the storage unit with the dead camera in my hands and the clip-on lamp buzzing above me, and I did not move. Everything was exactly where it had been. The photos on the floor around the chair, the coffee ring on the cardboard box next to me. Robert died 50 feet from my building, and I had his number in my phone the whole time. I did not move for a long time. When I finally got up, the chair scraped against the concrete, and the sound was so loud in the quiet that it almost scared me more than anything else had. I turned off the clip-on lamp, and the unit went dark, except for the hallway light coming in through the open door. I could see the outlines of everything Robert had built in there, and I did not want to look at it anymore. So I stepped out and pulled the door down, and the metal rolled and clanged, and I locked the padlock. My hands were shaking again, so it took a few tries. Then I walked down the hallway and out of the building, and it was dark outside, which meant I had been in there for something like 6 or 7 hours. The trash bags were still in the back seat. I got in and sat behind the wheel and did not start the car. I just sat there with my hands at 10 and 2, and my brain was trying to do something with everything I had seen in the last several hours, and it was not getting anywhere. It was like when you restart a computer and it hangs on the loading screen. You can hear it working, but nothing is coming up. I stayed until my breath fogged the windshield, and then I turned the key and pulled out of the lot. Route 8 south toward home. The road was mostly empty, and I drove it the way I always drive it, except now I was watching. I could not stop. Bus stops, sidewalks, anyone standing still on a corner or outside a gas station. I checked all of it, scanning the background the way Robert must have done for 20 years, looking for something in the edges that did not belong there. Because now I knew what could be standing on the sidewalk in Pittsburgh. And I knew I would miss it completely unless I was paying attention. That was Robert's whole life, and I called it crazy. About halfway home, I tried to talk myself out of it. Photos can be doctored, right? An old man with too much time and a printer could put together anything he wanted. The video could have been staged. I wanted that to work, and I sat with it for about 3 blocks. And then I heard Robert's breathing again in my head, the wet rattling at the end, and I knew. You do not stage the sound of your own heart stopping on a sidewalk in the dark. I parked on my street around 8:30. The building was right there, lights on in a few windows, somebody's TV flickering on the 3rd floor. Normal. Everything looked the same as it always looked. And I sat in the car and stared at the sidewalk in front of my building, and I thought about the photograph in Robert's file, the one taken from a parked car across the road, my building on the left side of the frame, the figure standing right about where a woman was walking her dog right now. She walked past the spot and kept going, and nothing happened, and the sidewalk was empty, and I still did not want to get out of the car. I got out of the car because I had to. There was no version of this where I sat in a parking spot on my own street all night, so I grabbed my keys and got out and started walking toward the building. The air was cold and the street was quiet. That late evening quiet where most people are already inside and the ones who are not are moving with purpose, heading somewhere. I was halfway to the front door when I saw something down the block. Or I think I saw something. That's the most honest way I can put it. There was a shape on the sidewalk, maybe 100 feet away, past the street light on the corner, and my eyes would not land on it. It was like trying to read a word that keeps going blurry. You can see there is something there, you can tell it has edges, but the details will not come together no matter how hard you focus. My brain wanted to file it under nothing and move on, and I could feel that happening in real time. Just look away, go inside, make dinner, be normal. Everything in me wanted to do that. But I had spent the last 7 hours in Robert's archive, and I knew from his notes that this is what it does. Your brain will not hold it, and you have to fight just to keep looking. So I stood there on the sidewalk in front of my building, and I tried. I kept staring at the shape down the block, and my eyes kept sliding off it, and I kept dragging them back. And every time I blinked, it was like starting over. I could not get it to come together. Whatever was standing there, my eyes just would not hold it. And then I remembered the camera. I pulled out my phone and pointed it down the block, and on the screen, it was clear. Distant. Small on a phone screen, but distinct. A tall shape on the sidewalk. Gray. Standing completely still, under the trees, past the street light. The camera could see what I could not. I took one photo. The shape was there on the screen. I raised my head, and the sidewalk was just a sidewalk, and I could already feel it going. The details of what I had just seen were softening, going vague, already half gone. Had I actually seen anything? The sidewalk looked empty. My brain was already rewriting the last 30 seconds into nothing. But when I checked the phone again, the photo was still there, and the shape was still in it, and there was nothing I could do about that. Cameras do not forget. That is why Robert spent 20 years with a Panasonic camcorder and a box of printed photographs instead of trusting what he saw. I went inside and locked the door and put the storage unit key on the kitchen counter next to my phone. My apartment looked exactly the way it had that morning. Dishes in the sink from breakfast, jacket over the chair, the same place it had always been. Except now, there was a photo on my phone of something standing on my street that should not be there, and a key to a storage unit full of evidence that nobody in the world besides me knew about. I thought about calling someone, Jake maybe, or the police, or anyone. But I could hear how it would sound before I even picked up the phone. I would say I found my dead uncle's storage unit full of newspaper clippings and photographs of a figure that has been appearing in Pittsburgh for decades, and that my uncle died confronting it on video, and that I saw it myself tonight, but my eyes would not focus on it, and I had to use my phone camera instead. I could hear exactly how that sounds because that's how Robert sounded to me for years. And whoever I told would become the person I was, the one who laughs and stops picking up and uses the word crazy. I would be Robert, making phone calls and nobody answers. I could walk away from it, delete the photo, cancel the storage unit, let whatever is in there get auctioned off or thrown out, and in a few weeks the details would go soft the way they were already going soft when I looked up from my phone on the sidewalk, and in a few months this would just be a weird story about cleaning out my uncle's stuff that I would not even fully believe anymore. The forgetting would do most of the work for me. It would be easy. It's what everyone else does. But the cycle is active. That is the part I cannot get past. Robert's map had the current cluster centered on my neighborhood, and people in this area might already be disappearing the way people disappeared near Helen 20 years ago. One at a time, unconnected. Cases that go cold because nobody's looking at the pattern. Robert knew. He spent his whole life knowing, and it did not save anyone. Knowing just made him the uncle his family laughed about and stopped calling. And I keep thinking about the storage unit, the folding chair with the scuff marks underneath it, the clip-on lamp buzzing on the shelf, the coffee ring on the cardboard box he used as a table. 20 years of that, $89 a month to keep paying attention to something the rest of the world would rather forget. The key is on my counter. I have not decided what to do with it yet.